So this is the GI map. This is the main test that I use with clients, although I have started also using SIBO testing. So that's a breath test. This is a stool test. And as it says at the top there, it is a DNA analysis. So the reason I prefer this one over others, there are some that we offer at the clinic that are stool tests done by culture, which means they take it and they grow it in a petri dish in the lab, and they see what grows, and then they determine what bacteria is in there based on what grows. The problem with that is it's only culturing what's alive when it comes out, right? Versus sometimes the bacteria, are living and alive in your upper gut, for example, but by the time they come out in your stool, they're dead. So they're still in there, obviously, and doing things, but just because they can't be cultured doesn't mean they're not there, right? So this is why I like the GI map, because it is a DNA analysis. It's taking DNA fragments of the bacteria that it finds. So everything, whether it's dead or alive, it's able to figure out what's in there and tell you exactly what you have in which amounts. And at the bottom, we're going to go through the other measures that it tells you about inflammation and other markers as well. So I'm going to try to keep an eye on questions as we go along. But so many screens open here. So if you happen to have any, I will try to keep an eye on that. Anyways, let's go through. So right here at the top, we've got bacterial pathogens. So these are typically always bad guys that we don't want to see present. However, there's always a stipulation. For example, E. coli. Now these are specific types of E. coli that, as far as I know, are quite toxic and harmful. However, E. coli is a normal part of our gut microbiome. And without it, we can't actually make some vitamins. So we need it. But when it gets out of control or there's more harmful strains like the ones listed here, we are going to have a problem, right? So really the goal of balancing the microbiome is to restore balance. It's not to kill anything and everything willy-nilly. It's to restore balance, because even if we have no overly bad bacteria, like if this all showed up with nothing really bad, but as we'll go down on a bit later, you'll see the more normal bacteria. If those are there, but they're extremely high or out of proportion, and or they're in the wrong area of your body, which we can't tell from this test, but I can tell from symptoms, right? So we talked about SIBO before. So we're going to take a look at some of the more normal or commensal bacteria shortly. And those are typically the ones that are colonizing your small intestine and causing SIBO. So they're not necessarily bad bacteria, but they're in the wrong place and there's too many of them. So that's how any kind of imbalance, it's a delicate system. Any kind of imbalance is going to cause issues. Okay. Before we go any further, I want to explain the notation here. So on the right-hand side where it says normal and there's those funky numbers, if you remember from school, that's scientific notation. So it's exponents, right? So it's 1 to the exponent 3 is what it's saying. So quite a high amount typically. Some of these, as we go down, like you'll see, adenovirus 1 to the exponent 10 is considered normal. Anything over that is considered an issue. So some of them are quite high, and this is the typical normal reference range on the right-hand side here. Now, that being said, this is a new science, and yes, there's been, several years or maybe a decade or so of this kind of testing, and so they gather the data from the people that have been tested and other studies to determine what's considered normal. But that doesn't mean that that's necessarily what's normal and healthy for you. So we kind of have to take these things with a grain of salt. And I also go by, your medical history and your symptoms and all of that. But that being said, this is kind of our normal reference range. On the left where it says result, that's what came up from the test itself. And in the middle column here, it tells you whether that's considered high or low. So high or low is abnormal, and that could be where a problem lies. So here's one, for example. You guys may have heard of C. difficile. That is one of the hospital-acquired infections that can be very difficult to kill with antibiotics. It's often an antibiotic-resistant organism, and people can die from it. So it's very serious. But in this case, we're testing only the toxins. So these are the toxins that are produced by C. difficile. That doesn't necessarily mean you have an active infection. It means you had it or you have it to some level in your body, either now or in the past, and it has produced some toxins, which could be an issue. Obviously, if it's very high, so E to exponent 5 versus exponent 3, it's quite high. But if the person is not having diarrhea and major gut issues, I'm not going to attack their system with really high dose antimicrobials or send them to a doctor for an antibiotic, right? We have to take it all with a grain of salt. The main thing I would do if that was the only thing that would be showing up is I would support their system by increasing things like probiotics and supporting their immune function by optimizing sleep and adrenals and all of that. If it says less than DL, that means it's not detectable. So that's a very, very low limit where they can detect it at all. So it's basically not there, okay? So we'll see here, for example, this E. coli, it's 8.6 to exponent 0, and the normal reference range is 1.0 exponent 3. So clearly it's lower than the limit, so it's not a problem. Some of them are even, for example, this is the one that causes cholera. So it's pretty crazy the things we can learn from these tests. Doesn't mean you have cholera if you have this in your body, but it is the bacteria that can cause cholera. Then we have parasites. So here's a couple parasites. Giardia is fairly common. And then we also have viruses in here. So obviously, this is not testing COVID, but we are testing for other common viruses. So everything looks good so far. The only thing this person has is those toxins for C. diff. So they may have come in contact with C. difficile at some point. Let's go down now. We're looking at H. pylori here. H. pylori you may have heard of. And that is the bacteria that causes ulcers, stomach ulcers. Now, again, just because it is there and it is positive and high doesn't mean that this person has an ulcer or is going to get an ulcer. When you're just looking at the first row there and it says it's high, it's, it's scary looking. It's like, oh shoot, this person has this H. pylori. But the thing is, most people have H. pylori in their body, but it may not be causing any problems. It's only a problem if these virulence factors here are showing up. So this person for sure, because they have 4 virulence factors showing up for H. pylori, they're going to have some problems. They probably either already have an ulcer or are going to develop an ulcer. And there is a GI map interpretive guide that's online that you can download and go through. I have it open here if it'll let me toggle to it. And it does tell you more about specific microbes and what kind of issues they might cause. So it tells you more about each of these virulence factors and where it might cause symptoms in the gut, for example. But again, this is a very complex thing that you would want to do only with a practitioner and not a DIY thing. Because as you can already see, just because something is positive doesn't mean it's a problem. So it's very, very complex. Okay, now we're looking at the normal bacteria flora. So these are normal bacteria that are in our gut, that should be in our gut in specific amounts in certain areas, and they all play different roles. But any kind of imbalance in them can indicate a problem like SIBO or other issues. For example, this person has a type of E. coli that is low. So we want to see this type of E. coli here, but it's quite low. So that might be a problem. We also notice here that the lactobacillus, which you may recognize, lactobacillus is one of the most common probiotics, and that's the type of probiotics, Lactobacillus acidophilus and plantarum, possibly rhamnosus, I believe, are the common ones that are in yogurts. Okay, but this isn't one of the most common types of bacteria. So here it doesn't specify per se. It's talking about lactobacillus as a whole group. So there's many different types of them, but they're all considered probiotics usually, right? And so we would want to see that at least in the normal reference range here. But here we're seeing that it's low. So that's a problem. This person does not have enough healthy lactobacillus bacteria. Now, these two down here are really important. So Akkermansia and Fecalibacterium prosnitzii. They have funny, crazy names, but you need to know that these two bacteria are considered keystone species, meaning they are very, very important in the gut, and they're important indicators of how healthy or unhealthy someone's gut is. So Akkermansia is actually a bacteria that eats mucus, produces mucus. It's a mucus. Basically, it means like Akkermansia means, and mucinophila means it loves mucus, right? So we do need to have that in certain amounts because we don't want to have too much mucus or too little mucus in our gut. Mucus is a protective barrier. But if it's too high, that can be a problem. We don't want the bacteria to eat up all of our mucus. We need to have some there, right? So that could be an issue. There's clearly a bit of imbalance there. And the Fecalibacterium prosnitzii, it looks like that one's normal. So that's good. So far we're looking at this person has been exposed to C. diff, not necessarily a problem. They likely have active H. pylori, which could be causing ulcers in their stomach. And they have low levels of some of the healthy bacteria and a high Akkermansia, which could be causing some irritation in the gut. Now here we're looking at more on the phyla level. So these other ones are a little more specific and on the more species level. This phyla level is talking a little bit higher up. And so there's two kind of main classes we look at, firmicutes and bacteroides. And we typically look at them as groups, and then we compare it as a ratio to get an idea of what the bigger picture is for this person's gut. So in this instance, this person has the normal level of firmicutes, which include, and I'm just going to bring up my notes so I can make sure that I can let you know which ones those are. So if you have more firmicutes, so this person had a normal level, but the ratio is where they have more firmicutes than bacteroides, that predisposes a person to obesity. And includes strains like lactobacillus, clostridium, and staph. So we saw that their lactobacillus was quite low, so it's likely that some of these other bacteria are too high, and that's tipping the scale literally to predispose them to metabolic issues, including obesity. And they produce short-chain fatty acids. So short-chain fatty acids are actually really important for your gut health, but when people have more short-chain fatty acids, that's an indicator that they are harvesting more calories. Their bacteria are harvesting more calories from their food, and that predisposes them to obesity. Obviously, there's many other factors that go into that, but that's just kind of an indicator. And then if they have low or high bacteroides, we don't want that either. We want like a balance, right? So high bacteroides is linked to things like inflammatory bowel disease. So that's things like Crohn's and colitis, which are very serious. And that may show up as high B. fragilis, Prevotella, Streptococcus, and H. pylori. So far we've seen this person has H. pylori. So they kind of have a little bit from each of these groups, but based on this ratio, they have, let me just take a look here. I'm like looking at the numbers. So slightly higher bacteroides than firmicutes. So we're more likely to have IBD rather than obesity. Which is interesting because people with IBD tend to have a hard time gaining weight. They tend to be quite thin, like myself. So that makes sense then in terms of the bacteria, right? If we looked at people having high firmicutes tend to lean more towards larger bodies and obesity. People with bacteroides with things like IBD tend to be more petite as a general rule, but not always. Okay, so now we're looking at the opportunistic bacteria. So these are bacteria that aren't necessarily bad in and of themselves, but when any kind of anything tips a scale and causes an imbalance in the system, so that's, stress, lack of sleep, poor diet, drugs like antibiotics, these guys come in and say, hey, this is my chance to take over and cause some damage here, right? And my chance to grow and thrive and multiply. So they are opportunistic for that reason. So this is the bacillus I was just talking about. That is a bacteroides. And we tend to see that or not bacillus, B. fragilis. So I'm getting them mixed up, which I don't know if they show in this view, but bacillus. So let's see here. Pseudomonas for this person is high. So that could be an issue. We also have high staphylococcus, which is something that's usually found on the skin, but in the gut as well, and high streptococcus. So that's the bacteria that causes strep infections. Interestingly, this one here, Methanobrevibacter or Methanobacter family, it's a methanogen, it's methane producing, and these are ones that I see commonly high in people that have chronic constipation. So they are prone to causing constipation, and as we get older, we tend to have a higher amount of those. So what we're seeing here in this opportunistic bacteria section is that they've got some pretty high levels of things that could cause a problem if the system is really imbalanced. And we do know that they have that H. pylori, so that's already a factor. But this is where I have to take into consideration, like, what are their current symptoms? What is their medical history? Do they have any other diagnoses that put them at risk? What's their immune system situation? Do they easily get sick, right? So these are all factors I take into consideration. Now we have the potential autoimmune triggers, and I'm going to be talking more about autoimmune stuff in the group soon, because you can have an autoimmune response going on in your gut, where your gut is attacking itself and causing inflammation, and your immune system is just triggering this systemic inflammatory response. Whether or not you've been diagnosed with an autoimmune disease, you can have some degree of autoimmunity happening in the gut. And that's one of the reasons that, you know, just doing diet and supplements and probiotics and addressing it from that perspective is not quite enough. We have to take into consideration the immune system. Because autoimmune diseases are on the rise, I always look at this factor for people. I ask them about their family history. I ask them about, do they have allergies? Do they, you know, what kind of foods they react to? This is all for me to get an idea of whether there could be a role of autoimmune issues in the gut. So if someone shows up with these, so I see a lot of Prevotella and Klebsiella and Citrobacter typically in the clinic. When we look at gut reports, I'm seeing a lot of these microbes. And so this person, for example, has high Klebsiella. So that's a really high risk that they could develop an autoimmune disease if they haven't already. So that this is a situation where, despite the fact that they have low healthy bacteria, that low lactobacillus, they have the high Klebsiella, high H. pylori. I'm going to be hitting them hard with some antimicrobial broad spectrum herbs to kill off these bad guys. And then we're going to rebuild the gut and bring back in the fibers and the probiotics as the final step. And this is why, as you can see, you know, what we've seen so far, when there's some of these guys in there, you know, sometimes if we put in enough probiotics and healthy foods into the system, it can shift the microbiome favorably. But when there's, you know, infections or things that have been going on for quite a while, and there's certain microbes that are really resistant to being killed, we really have to take that first step as that killing step if people have these bad bacteria. Otherwise, just taking a probiotic and eating well is not going to be enough to heal the gut, right? We have to get rid of these guys. These are guys that are not supposed to be in here. These autoimmune triggers, we have to kill them off. And sometimes when I work with people, especially if they've worked with a naturopath or someone before, and they've already done several rounds of the 4R protocol, including antibacterial and antimicrobial herbs, and they're still struggling, that's where I would recommend that they get more testing done. And or if the testing is showing that they still have like C. diff toxins or H. pylori, then they might want to go see a doctor to get an antibiotic at that point. So antibiotics do have their place, but we always want to try the natural route first because they're much less harmful on the gut. And they're actually beneficial. Some of the herbs that I use to help kill off these bad microbes actually help promote the growth of healthy bacteria and calm inflammation in other ways in the gut. Whereas antibiotics do work, they kill the bacteria, but they also cause a lot of nasty side effects and sometimes permanent damage and inflammation to the gut. Okay, so now down here, we've got the fungi yeast sections. So women who get recurrent yeast infections, people that react and have histamine intolerance or react to things, foods that are moldy or age cured fermented, or have a lot of like yeast overgrowth in any way, whether that's fungal toenails or the yeast white spots on the skin, that will likely come up here. So this person doesn't seem to have much yeast, at least from this sample. And we've got a few viruses here that are quite common. Epstein-Barr. This is where I would say if you're someone who has been struggling with gut issues for years and you've already seen a naturopath or a nutritionist, you've done testing, you've done rounds of gut healing, supplements, special diets, you feel like you've run the gamut and you've done it all and you're still really struggling, you need to get more testing and dive deeper to see if you have something like Epstein-Barr or Lyme or mold toxicity. These are three things that we call latent infections, or I guess latent is the word. There's another word I'm thinking of, but they can kind of lie low or lie dormant, and we don't really know they're there, but they're causing inflammation in the body and allowing these bacteria to grow out of control. It's bringing down your immune system enough that the bacteria are taking over, and you can't heal your gut because of this underlying virus. And oftentimes with things like Epstein-Barr, your immune system takes it and sequesters it and puts it away and says, okay, it's going to be safe if I just stash it over here. But then something happens. So you get really sick. Maybe you got COVID, maybe you got mono, maybe you had a surgery, or you had a major burnout because you've been working too much and not getting enough rest. And all of a sudden that virus becomes active again, right? And that's when we get this rebound of symptoms. So checking for viruses like that, these latent infections, if you're someone who's tried it all, highly recommend you get tested for Epstein-Barr, Lyme, and mold for sure. There's others, but those are the most common ones. Let me go down here. We've got the more parasites. So Blastocystis hominis. Again, that's one where I have done research and found out that it used to be like some naturopaths, and some still do, if that comes up as a parasite in their stool test, they're gonna do a protocol to kill it. They want to get rid of it. But there's some research that shows that it is quite common in people, and it might actually confer a positive benefit to your gut microbiome and actually allow and promote the growth of healthy bacteria. So we don't necessarily want to mess around with that. You know, if someone had nothing else bad showing up on their gut report and blastocystis came up really high, then maybe I would consider it. But typically, if it's showing up there, I'm not going to do anything about it because it's considered, in my mind, considered commensal. It's not a problem. We've got worms. So these are actual parasite type worms that might show up. So this person doesn't have any of those. And then, so here is really important markers of intestinal health. Steatocrit is the amount of fat that is isolated in the stool. So if it's less than 15%, that's considered normal. This person has 6, so that's fine. If their number was higher, so if it was 30 or higher, I would be concerned that they have fat malabsorption. So they're not absorbing fat, and that's a problem because we need fat for many functions of the body, including brain health, hormone production, to help us feel full, skin health, many, many things. But that also tells me that there's something not working in the upper gut. So either they're not producing enough bile from the liver, gallbladder, or releasing enough bile, and or they don't have enough stomach acid or digestive enzymes, and or their pancreas is not producing enough pancreatic enzymes. And that's the second one there, elastase 1, that is a pancreatic enzyme. So it's supposed to be higher than 200 micrograms. So this person is 388, so that's decent. If it was hovering closer to 200, I'd be a little more concerned and we'd want to support the pancreas a bit, but looks that their pancreas is pretty good. So it's likely not a problem with the pancreas and the fat absorption. Now, the GI markers, so beta-glucuronidase, I have mentioned before in the group, that is a marker of an enzyme that your bacteria produce, and it actually forces your body to recycle and reabsorb estrogen. So when your body has too much estrogen, the liver detects that, packages it up, sends it to the gut to be excreted. When it gets to the gut, though, if the bacteria in there are making too much of this enzyme, it's going to force you to reabsorb it into circulation and keep your estrogen high, which we don't want, right? We want to be able to excrete it if there's too much and balance it out. So here, this person is quite high. Well, not too much higher than the cutoff, but I would say some work needs to be done there, or otherwise they're going to end up with estrogen dominance and PMS type symptoms. So there's no blood. So occult blood is traces of blood in the stool. So we want to see less than 10 micrograms. So that's good. And the immune response. So secretory IgA, that is something that is a marker of our immunity in the gut. So IgA is one of the immune molecules. You may have heard of IgG. That's the food sensitivity testing. IgE is a true allergy. And IgA. So if we are someone who has taken a lot of the antibiotics, we're really burnt out, we've been through a lot of trauma and stress, I'm going to see likely really low IgA in these people. So even before I look at a test like this, if I have a client and they're telling me how burnt out they are and that, caffeine's not helping, their sleep's not restorative, they're just dragging their butt around all day, I'm going to guarantee that when I see this test, it's going to be low secretory IgA. And that means low gut immunity and low overall immunity. So we really want to see that in a normal, healthy range to keep our immune function high and to keep our gut healthy. This person is within the reference range, so we're all good there. Then underneath that, we have anti-gliadin IgA. So that is whether or not your body has made a response to gliadin, which is a part of wheat. Okay, so if that shows up high, so they said here the limit is between 0 to 157 and this person's 15. So they're quite low, no problem there. But if they were higher, say they were like 200 or higher, I'd say, okay, we have to get you off gluten completely because clearly you're mounting an immune response to it. And then the next one here, this is really important. We were talking about IBD before, so serious bowel disease, which we always have to rule out when you have chronic gut issues, right? We can't just assume it's IBS, which is functional. It's not comfortable, but it's not a big deal overall in terms of your health. IBD is serious. You could end up having to have part of your intestine taken out surgically. And have issues with malabsorption and all kinds of stuff the rest of your life. So we really want to keep an eye on inflammatory marker calprotectin. And this person has 22. We want to see less than 173. So that's totally fine. This one is an add-on. There are options for add-on tests with the GI map. In this case, it's zonulin, and they are high for zonulin. So zonulin is a marker of leaky gut, which we have talked about before. We know that leaky gut happens when we have chronic inflammation in the gut, whether that's from food, alcohol, drugs, and or bad bacteria causing inflammation. When that inflammation is there long enough, we develop microscopic holes in the gut lining, and food particles and other things are leaking into the bloodstream, and our immune system starts flagging them. And that's when we get chronic inflammation. We develop food sensitivities. So leaky gut is a big deal. And that's one of the reasons that gut is so important, gut health, for managing inflammation, mental health, balancing your immune response, but also it's why we use the 4R protocol and this 4-step healing process, right? We can't just take a probiotic. That's not going to heal the gut lining. We can't just take an antimicrobial supplement. Sure, that will kill the bacteria, but it's not going to heal the gut lining. So that's the third step in that protocol, is we do things to heal the gut lining, one of which is L-glutamine, which is a really important amino acid, but that's in conjunction with many other things. So I think this is the last part where it just tells me whether you have antibiotic resistant genes. So these are common antibiotics. So this person has antibiotic resistance to clarithromycin and tetracycline. So that's going to be an issue if they try to, if they ever end up in the hospital and the doctor gives them one of these drugs, it's not going to work for them. So then we know, it gives us the knowledge to know, look, going into it, I do best with amoxicillin or fluoroquinolones if that's what is needed for that kind of infection. Anyways, so that was a lot of information thrown at you. We went through a whole bunch of stuff. I hope you guys found it helpful. I don't know if there's anything else I need to add here, but do let me know if you have questions. I do offer the GI map as part of what I do in working with clients. Typically, because it's an expensive test and I want to make things as cost effective for people, if someone hasn't worked with a functional practitioner before and their gut symptoms are relatively new, or they just haven't tried alternative health before, I'm going to start off simply doing that 4R protocol. So that's dietary changes, some supplements, lifestyle changes. That keeps it a little more cost effective. And oftentimes we can make quite a difference and progress quite a bit with that. When it comes to using the GI map, I usually use that more on people that they've already tried a lot of these natural remedies. They've worked with practitioners before. And they've only made so much progress. They're feeling a bit better, but they're feeling stuck and these same problems keep happening. That's where I would want to dive in and do the GI map test right away, because we need to know exactly what's going on in order to make progress. I would also do it even in people, for example, I know a lot of you in the group have symptoms, but it is possible to have gut microbiome imbalances or dysbiosis without having symptoms. But if you have no gut symptoms, but you're having, chronic migraines, or you've got chronic allergies or autoimmune disease of some kind, rheumatoid arthritis, I'm going to want to see a GI map test, because I want to know what is in your gut that is triggering that inflammation and how can we kill it, right? So this is the reasons I would use this test. If you have any questions at all, again, just let me know. I'm going to post this video in the course for those of you who have purchased the course. If you haven't yet purchased the course, I'm going to be making it available again soon. So for those of you who joined as a membership, as I announced before, I recently discontinued membership, but everyone that bought the membership still has access to everything. It's just not going to be any new content going forward. For the most part, I might add things here and there. But for those of you who are interested in buying the course, which is my 8-module course, it includes information like this on the GI map. It includes understanding how your gut works, why you have these symptoms, why you don't need to do super restrictive diets long-term. We talk about supplements. We talk about the role of stress and your adrenals. So there's so many things. We talk about mental health. All that is in the course. And right now I'm kind of revamping it and changing the name and working on the website. So that'll be available within the next month or so. So I'm really excited to relaunch that for those of you who want access to these kind of resources. It's going to be up soon. So it's going to be less than $100, probably closer to 70 or 80. So very reasonable compared to a session with me, which is $140. I just wanted to make it cost effective for people as a really good starting place to understand, what's going on with your gut and take some initial steps to start feeling better. In there as well as also, I believe, at least 5 recipe collections, which I thought is really great because personally, when I started my gut healing journey, I had no idea what to eat. I was constantly Googling stuff. I didn't know anyone that had similar problems as me, so I was really overwhelmed. And this was many years ago when there wasn't as much information on this stuff. And so it was a huge struggle and a huge learning curve for me to figure out what I could eat, what I couldn't eat, how to make things taste good without having gluten or dairy and all of that. But I assure you it is possible, and I have a lot of really delicious and fairly easy recipes in there. So obviously I'm posting some recipes here in the group, but mostly just once a week on Tasty Tuesday. But in the course is going to be several recipe collections, and that includes options for gluten-free, dairy-free, paleo, low FODMAP, nut-free, all of that. Okay, have a good day, guys, and I will chat with you soon. Bye.